Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
All right, this is really going to be fun. I know I say that a lot, but this is really going to be fun because today my guest is Margaret Molloy, who is a good friend. We've known each other for, 9 or 10 years through the CMO Club. By the way, I think we should give a quick shout out to Pete Kranick. Hey, Pete. Hey, Pete. So, Margaret, if you don't know, is the global CMO of the branding firm Siegel+Gale. She's a native of Ireland, as you will hear shortly, and a Harvard Business School graduate. She is regarded as one of the most influential global marketing leaders and consistently appears on top CMO lists, including Forbes' top CMOs on Twitter. She's a strategic marketer, a sought-after speaker, a fashion diva. I could go on and on. And there's so many things that we could talk about. But Margaret is a CMO herself. She's an expert on branding, a frequent interviewer of CMOs. And she has this amazing side hustle, is the way the kids talk about it, is a side hustle. Or a passion project, as she calls it, which is wearing Irish, that we will dive into for sure. So let's get at it. Margaret, finally, I'm thrilled to have you on the show.
Hi, Drew. Great to be on a show that I listen to.
Well, I won't ask you who your favorite episode was, because that would be embarrassing for the others. But so we are going to do, I think first we're going to do Renegade Rapid Fire. Are you ready?
Let's go.
Okay. So what's your definition of marketing?
Marketing is the act of persuading an audience to take an action.
Persuading an audience to take an action. It's funny, I had an interview recently and we couldn't get to, he refused to provide a definition because of this convergence of marketing and sales and what is marketing and where does it stop. But I like your definition. So what's the primary role of the CMO?
The CMO's role is to balance the desire for business performance with the reputation of the firm and to navigate that tension between near-term business performance, which manifests itself in sales metrics, and brand building to get the firm the longevity and the strategic direction it needs.
Says the person who works for a branding agency. But I think you're right. And this tension between brand and sort of, if you will, direct marketing is really one of the dynamic tensions that every CMO faces.
I believe so. Look, many CMOs are faced with driving revenue. And particularly for publicly traded companies, that requires an emphasis on quarterly earnings. But the risk with that is losing sight of the strategic imperatives to drive the brand forward in the service of the longevity of the business, not just for the sake of the brand. So balancing short-term and long-term, that's the CMO's job.
Now, I know that you provide this counsel to Siegel+Gale clients. Are you applying it yourself as the CMO of Siegel+Gale?
Isn't it hard to take your own medicine? I hope so. We too are part of a publicly traded company and I have those imperatives. But yes, the harder question arguably is, am I getting the proportions right? Because it's easy enough to say that. How it manifests itself and how you're spending your hours every day.
Which gets me to my next question, which is, what's your top priority as CMO right now?
Mine is always meeting with clients, future clients, past clients, present clients, to understand their priorities, to make sure we're equipping ourselves both near term and long term to help them drive their business performance.
So just not to put you on the spot, but I guess this would is, so how many clients are you trying to meet with on a sort of weekly basis?
So right now in the summer season, I have what I'm calling Operation Dine. So Operation Dine is essentially myself having breakfast, lunches, coffees, dinners, as much as I can with CMOs, both in the New York market and beyond. So the number is sizable. It's in the dozens.
Wow. Okay. Dozens per week.
Per week.
Per week. Wow.
Per week. And sometimes that's challenging to get. But that's the goal. And they don't have to be very involved meetings. They're also relationship building.
Sure.
And being able to say to the guy or the gal at the other end of that cup of coffee, what's keeping you awake at night now? And sometimes it's branding, often it's not, but it's always positive.
It's funny. So we were recording this at lunch hour, so I got in the way of Operation Dine.
Yes, because you're an influencer.
I see. So we're playing a part here. So what's your favorite part of the job?
My favorite part, it's consistent with the last few questions, is really being in front of customers. In my case, it's CMO clients, understanding their priorities. And the joy comes from being able to match them to professionals at Siegel+Gale or others in my network that can help them achieve their desired outcomes. It's old-fashioned matchmaking.
Interesting. So, okay, what's your least favorite part of the job?
My least favorite part of the job is budgets. Both managing our own budget and, frankly, when I find myself in conversations where the CMO's ambitions exceed their budgets. That's not fun.
Oh, so this is the budgets, not the budget that you have to market Siegel+Gale. This is client budgets and trying to get them to spend enough to get the job done.
Exactly.
I see.
Exactly.
Okay. So it's spend more, people, if you really want to do it right. Okay. What's the best advice that you were ever given?
I'm fortunate to be in receipt of a lot of good advice. I solicit counsel and I get lots of it. But when I reflect on it, I think the best advice I ever received was probably from my parents. And it was a simple counsel, and that is keep your promises. Because if you keep your promises, you build your reputation. And in the end of the day, in my role, but arguably in anyone's role, that's really the currency that never devalues. It's
so true. I mean, trust has been a huge, there was a headline in The Economist about the trust machine. Trust is certainly under fire when you look at some brands like Uber and Facebook. And even Salesforce is talking about a trust revolution, but applying that to an individual.
Yes.
Because it takes a lifetime to build trust and like a heartbeat, a New York minute to lose it.
It does. And also it takes prioritization because we are all so busy. And in the process of not keeping our promises, we're eroding trust unintentionally, often.
So this may be an obvious one, but what's the most renegade thing you've done in your career?
The most renegade thing that I've done, and we'll probably get to it, is the Wearing Irish initiative. And why is that renegade? It's renegade because as a 40-something, non-model, non-fashion influencer, to go and post pictures of yourself wearing fashions from Ireland, which is unheard of, that's pretty renegade.
I would have to agree with that. And I've been happy to have participated in taking some of those pictures. I'm specifically thinking of one in Marina Del Rey at a CMO Club Summit event, and also following you on Instagram. And it is it was a brave move. And we are going to go into that side hustle in a little bit. Let's talk about brands that you admire.
I admire brands that really seem to be bold. The one that comes to mind, and I preface it by saying it's not a Siegel+Gale client, is Netflix. And I admire Netflix because they were bold enough to disrupt themselves multiple times. They went from being in the mailing business of DVDs to streaming and now content.
Yeah.
And to me, that requires courage. I studied under Clay Christensen at the Harvard Business School. And at those days, back in 97, when Clay published the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, the articulation was that it's so hard to disrupt yourself. So I love Netflix because they had the courage to disrupt not just their brand, but their business model.
It's really, that's such a good point. Of course, we talk about courage a lot on this show. And that's a great example. It sort of goes back to Gillette's world of always constantly competing with themselves and reinventing even the razor blade. So, okay. Is there a recent book that you've read that's made you rethink something?
Yes, I read a lot of fact books, actually. I need to up my fiction quotient. But the book I read recently is by Dr. Mark Hyman. I met Dr. Hyman at the Nantucket Project. And he published a book entitled Eat Fat, Get Thin. And why am I referencing that? Not because I have a weight issue, but more because it really emphasized the importance of health. and how we can be so educated professionally, but so underinformed around food and exercise. And personally, that's not something I've prioritized. And it's really helped me think about that's something else I need to think about.
I'm going to be reading the book Get Dumb, Be Intelligent, because that could probably work for me. So all right. I've asked this question a lot to folks. Do you think machines will ever be able to do your job?
Not if I define my job as building reputation.
There you go. Okay. And what would you be doing if you weren't a marketer?
I would probably be a business talk show host. I would be Drew.
Oh, yeah.
Doing the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to switch chairs now. I'm going to let Margaret take over the interview. All right. Well, that's it for Renegade Rapid Fire. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about wearing Irish and a side hustle and why this idea is probably relevant to a lot of other CMOs.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Margaret Molloy, who is the CMO of Siegel+Gale. But we're not going to talk about that yet. We're going to talk about hashtag wearing Irish. And this is a passion project that I'm very aware of. And if you actually go on Instagram and hit hashtag wearing Irish, you will see her smiling face and many of the clothes that she has helped bring to the United States. And when we were talking about this show, I asked the tough question, you have a full-time job as a CMO. Why do a project like this?
So the why is passion motivated. And my motivation is very simple. I recognize that as marketers, we have a set of skills and capabilities. Personally, I have a significant and engaged network, so I have the power to convene. And yet I realized that there are world-class fashion designers in Ireland that don't have that access and exposure. So I recognized that this was a way for me to give back, to apply my marketing skills, open my network, to essentially give fashion designers who are doing wonderful work access and exposure. And then the program manifests itself in many ways, but that's the core of the idea.
And I went to one of your events for Wearing Irish and met a number of, I think you brought 10 designers over from Ireland of all different, jewelry designer and various clothing designers and a leather worker and, some really beautiful things. Let's talk about how you balance this or some of the value that this brought to your role as a CMO at Siegel+Gale.
Yes, I think that value is threefold. The first value is wearing Irish gives me the opportunity to have a lab. I can experiment. And I believe that's vitally important for every CMO to have a sidebar, a lab where they can explore marketing at a level that doesn't incur risk for the company, but elevates their understanding.
I think that's such a really important point. And, we talked about courage a little bit earlier. You have to have the courage to experiment. And you have to have permission to fail. Well, sometimes it's very hard with the main business to do that. And earlier, I did an interview with the CMO of MailChimp, and they actually created a business that they could then test their product on. And their business idea came from an employee. And so it as you described it, created a lab. Okay, so that's number one.
The second reason is it helps me develop my empathy for CMO clients. So day in and day out, I'm talking to CMOs who are in the business of building their brands, and I can provide excellent counsel. Today, after doing Wearing Irish 2 years in, I have a lot of empathy for the bumps along the road and the challenges and what it takes to build a brand. So my counsel is much more grounded and less theoretical.
So in focusing on that, I love that. And experience as a great teacher and you've been in the trenches. What were some of the things that you learned as a result of this that you've been able to sort of share with or could potentially share with? You certainly have more empathy for entrepreneurs.
Yes. I have also empathy for people who put on events, because a big part of the program was event driven. And how do you drive an audience to an event, which is an important tool in a marketer's arsenal. I also drove this initiative with zero budget.
That's hard.
How do you build a following on social media? That's certainly valuable. Also, how do you pick the right partners? So a significant part of brand building, whether it's Wearing Irish, or I would argue whether it's any company today, is around the ecosystem you're building. And how do you develop an ecosystem that's additive, sometimes a little unexpected? So certainly all of those requirements for executing an event, building a brand, are very transferable.
And I think when you say ecosystem, what I hear is, so the event is a marketing event essentially, but you have to market the marketing. Exactly. And the ecosystem enables that. And perhaps a partner that has their own sort of media ecosystem can do that. But it's hard, right? I mean, it was hard. You had to build that from scratch, and you had to find people who were inherently connected to this idea as the core, right?
Yeah, exactly. And look, it's like a lot of marketing. You want to inspire people. In the context of Wearing Irish, I say I'm not in the fashion business, I'm in the inspiration business. So I had to find groups, many of whom did not have an Irish affinity, because that's too limiting, and inspire them that with the fashion and with an untold story. Everyone likes a new story. So my framing of this is, I'm telling the untold story of Irish fashion design. That was intriguing to people because people like to discover. So a lot of these qualities and emotional reactions you're getting from an audience that I strove to get at Wearing Irish, when you reflect on it, are the same reactions most CMOs want from their customers.
Absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense. What was if you're looking back on this thing, sort of the most gratifying part of this program for you?
The most gratifying part is, on a commercial level, the metrics, seeing the scale of the audiences that came, understanding that at least 2 of these designers now will be picked up by big box retailers, a number of many direct-to-consumer customers as a result. So that's the short-term gratification. The long-term gratification comes from the fact that meaningful conversations are happening in Ireland right now around supporting the designers. And that has a ways to go, but that's very gratifying because the impact on the country can be very significant. A lot of the emphasis from an economic development standpoint on Ireland is around tech companies, as it is in every country. But I would submit that creativity and tech aren't mutually exclusive. And for Ireland to be an attractive tech location, it behooves us to show our creativity, and fashion is a very tangible way and accessible to so many audiences. So to one degree, it's a direct benefit to the designers, but the more interesting macro benefit is positioning the country of Ireland as a creative location.
And this sort of your personal brand is very tied in with Ireland. I mean, it has been part of your personal, obviously you were born there, but you've done many things related to that. And which is great and certainly has differentiated you as a CMO in the business, and it's probably a model for people to think about when you're building a personal brand. The challenge that you and I have talked about over the years is, how do you build this personal brand in such a way that it also enhances the company that you're working for? So now maybe you could tie how Wearing Irish is sort of a benefit to your role at Siegel+Gale.
Certainly. And I think it begins with having that question in your mind at the onset, being aware that that's a tension you have to navigate and that's an equation you have to optimize. So the first part is being mindful of that. For me, it's unequivocal. The work that I'm doing on behalf of Wearing Irish or elsewhere is giving me a currency. It's giving people a conversation starter to talk to me. In fact, I would argue it's enhancing the likability of our brand at Siegel+Gale because it is making us very accessible to people, and everyone likes a feel-good story. And if you can start a conversation with a feel-good story, it may go to an interesting commercial place. So I see it as mutually enhancing.
Yeah, it's the feel-good story, and I watching you introduce it. Of course, you did tell a story as part of your introduction to this one section that I was at. I know it was a full day event, but you had a sort of interesting one that broadened the scope of the conversation with some sort of forward-thinking designers, and I'm going to call them futurists in the design world. Anyway, it was a great event, and so as we wrap up this section, maybe you could just sort of summarize sort of the key lessons learned for you through this experience.
The first lesson is, if you have an idea, just do it. Make yourself accountable. Put a date in the diary that will give it a forcing function. Because the number of people who have come up to me and said, oh my, I have a similar idea, but I never got around to doing it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, don't underestimate your power, be it to fundraise, because there was a significant amount of fundraising involved, or to recruit volunteers who will help you and join you on the mission if indeed the idea is inspiring. And the third lesson learned is be really thoughtful about your economic partners, be they the folks who give you seed capital or sponsors, because they are the kind of people that you're spending time with, and lots of lessons learned there.
Yes, exactly. Pick your partners well. All right. Well, with that, we're going to end this portion of the conversation. And when we get back, I think we'll just dive into the wacky world of CMOs and what we both learned about them. So stay with us.
Renegade Thinkers Unite is brought to you by Social Media Explorer, the website that explores the world of social media from the inside out. Great advice from today's leading social media columnists and experts at socialmediaexplorer.com. That's socialmediaexplorer.com.
All right, we're back, and my guest is Margaret Molloy, the CMO of Siegel+Gale and the star of Wearing Irish, and a longtime friend of yours, truly. And we've had the pleasure of interviewing a number of chief marketing officers between the two of us. And I think it would be an interesting conversation now to talk about what you see as the keys to a successful chief marketing officer. Who are the ones that, what is it that they have, their characteristics that make them successful in your mind?
I think the primary characteristic of the CMOs who are tracking well is that they are fundamentally simplifiers. And that means they can cut through the clutter. And there's a lot of dimension to that, which we can get into, but that's at the heart of my belief.
And I know that Siegel+Gale promises simplicity and simple. And I love to say this because if you've ever done an app development and you know that apps, for example, start out by doing one magical thing. And when you start developing an app, what you find is, well, we could add this and we could add that. The hardest thing is to take things off the table. Simple is really hard.
That's right.
It's really, really hard to make things simple, whether it's a message or an app or a campaign or anything, And so how are these simplifiers, as you called, how do they do that?
I think, and I've interviewed dozens of them, some are clients, some are not. I think they have a certain set of behaviors that separates them from other CMOs. And a mindset difference too. So one set of behaviors is they are very purpose driven. They are very clear on what does their brand stand for, what is the brand purpose, and they genuinely live that and use that as a filter to dictate priorities. Another quality of the CMOs that are simplifiers is they are very fact-based, but at the same time they have imagination. And the imagination informs the kind of questions they ask of the data to get them to fact. So fact-based decision-making. The third is they are bold and brave in prioritization. So they are willing within their organizations to say no to people's pet projects because they make sure that what they're doing, they do well and it's aligned with purpose and the decisioning is supported by facts. So those are key attributes. The other thing that's interesting is they create small teams and they empower those small teams to do work within a set of guiding principles, as opposed to being very directive. So they have appreciation for process, but they also balance that with empowering people. So those are some of the qualities of simplifiers, and they sound quite generic, but when you see it in action, it's quite powerful.
It's funny, I had John Miller, who is the CMO of Engagio. He's the CEO of Engagio. He was the CMO of Marketo and one of the founders. And I asked him what the role of the CEO was. And he said someone told him this, and it is, one is to set the vision, i.e. what you just described as the purpose. Two, to get the right people in the right seats. And three, figure out where to spend the money.
That's right.
And manage allocation. But I think it's interesting that your notion that the small team, of course, there were several things that you mentioned. And I'm wondering if so when you mentioned, set the vision, Phil Clement came to mind, our mutual friend, who, recently left Aon, but did that on a global scale. With that, I'm wondering if you have other examples of folks that you've seen in action that have sort of embodied these characteristics.
One brand that comes to mind is CVS Health, and the CMO Norm, I think, does a fabulous job of simplifying in arguably healthcare, one of the most complex industries. And the point of departure for CVS Health is clarity around their purpose. So their purpose is helping people on a path to better health. So that purpose informs not just their marketing strategies, but their business strategies. Case in point, a couple of years ago, they decided to take tobacco out of the stores. Now that's a bold move.
It was hugely bold. I mean, I think I seem to recall it was close to $1 billion in revenue, maybe.
More, in fact.
More, right.
And that was making sure that their execution aligned with their purpose. Again, what sets a simplifier apart from others, they don't just put lipstick on and talk about purpose. They make sure the business decisions follow through.
It's funny, while that was happening, you had the same sort of interesting dynamic at Unilever, where they had Axe being this sort of youthful boy brand, and you had Dove being this sort of campaign for real beauty, right? And these two were very conflicting ideas. And since then, the CEO of Unilever said, no, we're a purpose-driven company, and they've scaled back on the Axe sort of more misogynistic activities.
And I think you know that because in today's world with social media and the empowered consumer, you get called out when you don't live your purpose. But I bring it back to the simplifier because it's difficult to articulate a purpose that you can live by. Right. So the second attribute of why I think CVS is a great example is this purpose now empowers them to have this conversation around a potential merger with Aetna. So having a purpose that is on a path to better health makes that seem like a sensible business decision.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for reminding me of that, because when you first heard about that merger, it didn't make any sense.
And now it does when you think of it in the context of their purpose. And another example, just yesterday, I read that CVS Health is making pharmacy delivery of prescriptions available to people. Delivery of prescriptions. Again, if you're trying to help people on a path to better health, that seems like a good decision. Getting back, though, to the core of your question, that required prioritization because all of these decisions require business trade-offs. So great simplifiers have great courage as well.
Yeah, and we talk about courage as the first part of CATS is courage, artful, thoughtful, and scientific. And you sort of covered all those in your very articulate way of purpose-driven, fact-based, with some imagination, bold and brave, with a small team that they empower to execute. I think those are all really good and clear. So presumably the CMO that stumbles because they make things too complicated.
Or they don't have either the fact base or the internal support to be courageous and prioritize.
And by the way, that's why when I talk about artful, that's what I'm really talking about. I often use storytelling as a euphemism for artfulness, but the truth is, all I'm really talking about is the ability to persuade people in and connect with them on an emotional level. And CMOs that are good at doing that on an internal level succeed. The ones that just sort of try to drive it home and announce it and don't build consensus rarely do. And I imagine that's a big part of what you do in your world is helping organizations make a brand real internally.
Absolutely. Employees are the new frontier when it comes to branding. I firmly believe that because they are, in some cases, on the front lines, but in every case, they are either influencing the product you're creating or the experience the customer is having. No longer, as we all know, is it about what marketing is broadcasting. The customer experience is the brand. And that's delivered often by people who do not work for marketing. So marketers need to be able to build that internal consensus. When we work with clients, you first have a cultural touch point. Some organizations, facts are the way to that. So a significant investment around research to help decision makers internally have confidence in the choices they're making. Other organizations, there's a heavier emphasis on literally more storytelling and the use of design artifacts to exhibit the best behaviors. But fundamentally, it's about persuading people to act, which we talked about earlier is at the heart of the marketing skill set. And the irony I find is when I talk to many marketers, either their financial budgets or their energy levels or emotional budgets are done after they complete a rebrand, what we would call the launch. But they run out of steam or mojo or sometimes budget to actually bring it to life through the people.
And this is a great place for sort of me to go on a little bit of a diatribe. So an article that just appeared recently in Ad Age that I wrote, it says marketing needs to be more than a coat of paint. And the issue that I often have with branding and rebranding exercises, they change the logo, they change the tagline, it goes out on the business cards, and it's so what? But interestingly, in one of the conversations I had from an unsuspecting brand, this Park Place Technology, which does server warranties and server farms, extended warranties, but they had the idea that it's for the customer challenge was keeping it up. It was always about uptime, right? But the way they brought it to life in this promise all about uptime was they created a new product with artificial intelligence that could predict when a thing was going to fail, right? And that, in that way, they could guarantee the actual promise of, which you said, stick to your promises. But I think about that, I think about like freaking cable boxes. They know, Spectrum knows that my one cable box is like 9 years old and going slow. They don't need artificial intelligence for that. They could preemptively deliver on that if they had a purpose that was somehow or other connected to making their customers happy or tech forward or excited about the experience. Anyway, I just connected dots that really probably shouldn't have been connected. But my point here for you to think about is you have to take an action. You mentioned CVS and you mentioned them taking the action of taking cigarettes off the shelf. That was a huge sort of do in a way. I also like to see do's in a sort of what else did they do? And so while buying a healthcare company, health insurance company, that's certainly one big action that stands behind it. So as you're thinking about your brand and your rebrand, think about the things that you can do with employees to make this thing tangible.
Absolutely. And it's never done. So another mistake people make is they marketers get bored with their own content quicker than their audience, whether the audience is the internal colleagues or an external audience. So don't underestimate the fact that you need to continually tell that story internally and externally, even if it feels like old hat to you.
And so here's a question for you. Have you guys ever come across a brand that had a fantastic positioning that you said you don't need to change it?
Yes, but maybe you need to live it.
Right.
So that happens. And therefore the council is, let's mobilize internally to create programs to empower employees. Employer branding or employee engagement is a huge area right now. And sometimes the motivation, often mercenary, is to attract the right talent.
Right.
So you could have a great brand, but people may not know about it.
And I think that's a pretty good place for us to wrap up as we think about this thing, because I'm often seeing a new CMO comes on the job. They want to put their imprimatur on the business, so they throw away what was there and start again. And the truth is, it's so hard. It takes so long and so much corporate energy to reposition a brand. And oftentimes the person before you wasn't an idiot. They may have done a lot of due diligence. So rather than dropping what you have, think about a way of just refreshing it. And there's lots of, sometimes if the idea is strong enough, there's a extraordinary number of ways of refreshing it. Okay. Well, I've talked a lot more in this episode than I expected to, but hey, there we go. So Margaret, first of all, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. A pleasure to finally make the cut.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So that's an inside joke between the two of us, but yes, which has been going on for maybe 9 years. So, all right. I'm so grateful for your time, the energy that you take to listen and share the show. It's much appreciated. Feel free to write another review on your favorite podcast channel. Until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.